Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me play Destiny. So, today, they released a dev insights on the website. I've yet to see it, but I saw a bunch of things on YouTube as soon as I opened my computer that were like, nerf to what well, nerf to bubble, blah blah blah. So, we're gonna go over this and see what it all is about, hey? Am I gonna read this whole thing? Yes, but for you guys, it's just gonna be dot points for the most part. So we're going over updates to a large portion of the Stasis ability suite, including a new keyword, Frost Armor. Cool, I've been wondering what that is. A near future of Well of Radiance and Ward of Dawn in the Find of Shape. Interesting, so we're going to get nerfs, seemingly. A subclass by subclass breakdown of balance changes to abilities, aspects, and fragments, including but not limited to those included with Prismatic. Interesting. So to start, we have Stasis subclass. Okay, so they're just saying they haven't had time to work on it yet. Frost Armor is a stacking buff that reduces incoming damage with greater damage reduction as the stack increases. At launch, Frost Armor will be granted from a variety of sources, including the Tectonic, Grim, and Glacial Harvest aspects, fragments, and exotic armor. By default, you can build a maximum number of 5 stacks of Frost Armor in the last 9 seconds, but with the newly revoked Whisper of Rime fragment, Frost Armor's maximum lifetime increases to 13, and you can build up to 8 stacks. Interesting. Unlike the Stasis Shard Overshield, Frost Armor remains active when your super is cast, though its effectiveness is slightly lower when your super is active, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't make a difference because you're in super, so you get damage reduction anyway, so it doesn't really matter. New Frost Armor keyword. You are fortified by layers of durable stasis matter, reducing incoming damage. Frost Armor damage resistance grows stronger as you gain additional stacks. Reduce damage from PvE combatants by 4.5% per stack and from enemy players by 2% per stack. Interesting. So you're getting 22.5% by default. That's pretty significant damage reduction, assuming you can stack it quickly. My assumption here, by the way, is if you are anyway built into... So it says it works with Tectonic, Grim, and Glacial, right? So it's going to be off Stasis Shards, is where you're going to get this most of the time. And I feel like Stasis Shards are usually relatively easy to get in... you'll get 5 Stasis Shards. If you get any Stasis Shards, you're going to get around 5 Stasis Shards, 4 or 5 anyway. From the one instance of creating them, so it should be relatively easy to get working. Whisper of Rime reworked. No longer grants a Stasis Overshield when collecting a Stasis Shard, now increases the maximum duration and stack count of your Frost Armor, that makes sense. Get rid of that weird, kind of void mechanic almost out of Stasis, like, makes sense. Alright, so here they're essentially just saying that the reason that they don't want to overbuff Stasis Shards is because they're created for all players, but they're instanced. So if you create 3 Stasis Shards, really you're creating 3 times 3 because you've got 3 people in your fire team. So you're making 9 rather than just 3, which makes sense. But they're also they're changing shards, so they now grant a small amount of health and stack of Frost Armor alongside the benefit when you make them from Tectonic, Grim, or Glacial Harvest equipped. Interesting. Alright. So all Harvest aspects, added new behavior. While Grim, Tectonic, or Glacial Harvest is equipped, Stasis Shards grant a small amount of health and stack. Frost Armor, large Stasis Shards now from Grim Harvest grant more health and Frost Armor stacks, that makes sense. All Harvest aspects now have a standardized cooldown where a large number of shards are created very quickly. That's interesting. I kind of want numbers on that. Does that mean after I create 5 shards, I can't create any for 10 seconds or something? Or does it mean if I do something that creates a bunch of shards, they're limited to how many that can be created? Like if I do one instance of shattering a bunch of crystals, where I would have got, if I'd done it properly, I would have got like 100 shards. It just limits it to like 6 or whatever. The wording is not clear to me one way or the other. Tectonic Harvest now creates a Stasis Shard when shattering a frozen target in addition to shattering a crystal. That makes it much better, honestly. Our intention is that Frost Armor can be granted through a variety of sources. As part of this, we're updating Renewal Graphs and Ballador's Wrathweavers to directly grant Frost Armor, rather than their own custom damage resistance or Stasis Shard Overshield. So Renewal replaces generic damage resistance with Frost Armor. On entering your Dustfield grenade volume, you and your allies gain a stack of Frost Armor. For every 0.9 seconds while in the volume, an additional Frost Armor stack is granted, resetting your timer. Interesting. Oh, I see. I was about to say that's just a nerf, but not necessarily. It's a nerf on like direct throw and like throwing a dust field at your feet and living because you can't get killed by next to anything because of the damage resistance. But it's a buff because you can leave the grenade field and you're still going to have the damage resistance, right? So it's less initial damage resistance, but you can take it outside the grenade. It's interesting. It changes their utility. I'm thinking of the, like, Renewal Grasp I pretty much only ever used in PvP, but it changes their utility of throwing it onto a cap point and then running in, or throwing it at your feet while you're on a cap point, and it kind of changes it to more of a defensive thing where you throw it at your feet around a corner, all build up your frost stack, and then you can run into the point. Interesting. It changes how it works, but I'm not sure if it's better or worse. I think it's just different. And then Ballador's Wrathweavers replace Stasis Shard Overshield with Frost Armor when you activate your Rift, or used your Winter's Wrath Shatter attack. Cool, I guess. I never used Ballador's. I got them and then threw them in my vault. I don't think I've literally ever equipped them. So that sounds fine, but I don't remember what the original one did properly anyway, so it doesn't matter. Alright, to help increase the capabilities of to generate Stasis Shards, we've created a brand new fragment that offers a straightforward method that can slot into many different build types. Whisper of Chill. Stasis Weapon Final Blows have a chance to create a Stasis Shard. That's really good. That's really good. Whisper of Chains no longer grants passive damage resistance when near a Stasis Crystal or frozen target. Now grants a chance to create Stasis Shard when defeating a target while you have one or more stacks of Frost Armor. So this is probably good. The description here of why is essentially that it's very inconsistent, and it's kind of, what's the term? Counterintuitive to how Stasis should be played in every other instance. So generally speaking, you want to create crystals and then shatter them, whereas Whisper of Change, you got damage resistance while near a crystal, so you didn't want them shattered. Which, it's anti-synergy, right? So you don't want it. So what they've done instead is they've just made it so that it's once you have Frost Armor, it's going to be quicker to keep it up, I guess, because you're going to be able to create more Stasis Shards just from killing shit, which is interesting. It's probably still going to be very, very good, I think. Whisper of Fractures no longer increases melee energy regeneration while surrounded by enemies. Now grants a stack of Frost Armor when you shatter any frozen target with a melee attack. I mean, great, I guess. Again, this one's hard to tell until I actually play with it. Alright, so Torment, grenade energy gains are no longer dependent on your current health value. Your base grenade energy regeneration amount per incoming damage event increases from 5 to 7%. Interesting. Okay, I understand now. So it's just any damage gives you a 7% on your grenade cooldown. And if you have Frost Armor, each point of damage gives you 7 to 12. Oh, interesting. Really leaning into Frost Armor there. But that means if you get shot 10 times when you have Frost Armor, which is feasible because you have Frost Armor, so you have damage resistance, right? Then you get your grenade back. Seems very good, actually. And finally, we've created one brand new Stasis Fragment, Whisper of Reversal. It's a close combat tool for our Frost Armor users, adding chances for additional crowd control if you're willing to take the risk. While you have Frost Armor, dealing or receiving physical melee, i.e. not projectile melee, damage slows your victim or attacker. Interesting. Because receiving or dealing physical melee damage, I assume that also works with uncharged melee. In which case, yeah, I think it's just gonna be good, right? Interesting. Alright, now let's talk Shatter. While we want to focus Stasis primarily on high-value crowd control abilities in the current sandbox, shattering a frozen target doesn't always result in the payout that the other damage types are able to deliver with their capstone keywords, especially in high-difficulty activities, indeed. Misjudging your ability to capitalize on a freeze can lead to dire consequences. To help address this, we're bumping base shatter damage versus PvE combatants from 200 to 400. Interesting. Note, this does not affect Stasis Crystal detonations. Right. Okay, I understand. That makes more sense. So it's not the effect of detonations on crystals, it's shatter. If you freeze and then shatter an actual PvE combatant, it's doing double damage. That's okay. That makes sense. And simultaneously, we're fixing an issue where boss combatants receive double damage from auto-shattering, so we don't quadruple the shatter damage. I didn't know that was a thing. Interesting. So, increase the base PvE shatter damage from 2 to 400. Fix an issue where bosses auto-shattering were being hit by 2 instances of shatter damage. I guess that actually makes sense, because I do remember there was a couple of instances, particularly with, like, when you use Galahorn and what's the name? There was a Stasis rocket, but it could get Chill Clip, and every single one of the Wolfpack rounds would do freeze and shatter, and it was doing a shitload of damage. I guess it must have been auto trigger in every single one of those. I actually hope they reintroduced that, because that was like a really cool damage tech, but maybe it's still too powerful even without the double shatter. I don't know. I just really liked it because it only worked for like one person on your team, right? So you have a galley, you have one person with that Chill Clip roll, and it was just that one person got some extra damage because of the shatters. It was great. It didn't stack because it shatters, right? So because they only freeze and shatter X number of times, it doesn't actually like stack together. It's the same as like Dragon's Breath. It doesn't get the damage boost when you use multiple because it's the ignition damage doing the actual damage. So stacking it isn't as beneficial. And Fiction Issue, where players in an active super would show immune damage flyouts when automatically breaking out of stasis freeze. That's it for general stasis updates. In addition to these changes, we made a number of updates to class-specific stasis abilities. Alright, let's have a look. Alright, for Warlocks, it's very easy. We're just getting a buff to Ice Flare bolts, making the Seekers go from 5 to 7. That's a big buff to Ice Flare. Ice Flare is already very good. As I said here, Shadebinder is always, it's just good. It's a good subclass in everything. It's very good in PvP, and it's very good in PvE. So they're not really doing much. That's fair enough. Moving on to the Hunter. Alright, so we have Winter's Shroud. They're adding behavior to it, so they're just buffing it. Slowing targets briefly increases your class ability regeneration rate, and the bonus is reduced in PvP game modes, that's fine. And now grants a PvE damage reduction when activated as well, which is really good. So Winter Shroud, by the way, is the dodge makes things slow around you. So giving the damage reduction is really good. Alright, Touch of Winter is also getting a buff in 2 of the grenades. So Glacier Grenades, it is increasing the count from 6 to 7. Although it is also lowering the time. The Glacier Grenade ring now forms 0.2 seconds rather than instantly. I don't understand the point of this. Is that just to nerf Shatter Dive? In PvP, so you have to like wait a quarter of a second-ish before you can Shatter Dive them? I don't know, that's interesting. And then Cold Snaps no longer chains an additional time while Touch of Winter is equipped. Instead, Seekers now duplicate when they freeze a target. Second and third Seeker chains now create a medium and large stasis crystal respectively, rather than every chain creating a small crystal, so you're going to be getting better stasis shards. Or better crystals, rather, which is interesting. I feel like Dust Fields... Sometimes you would use Glacial Grenade on Touch of Winter, but ever since they nerfed Shatter Dive, I feel like everyone's just using Dust Field if they're using it, but we'll see. Alright, while Silence of Squall is still effective at locking down rooms full of enemies, we've done a small touch-up on its ability to roam the battlefield and how quickly it converts from a slow to a freeze on PvE combatants. We think this will increase its viability, target rich environments. Increase the Silence of Squall maximum travel speed by 10%, that's terrifying. Specifically with PvP. Squallstorm now slows down when any target is within its area of effect to reduce instances where it would overshoot its target. That's very good for PvE, and probably not that impactful on PvP, I would guess. Increased damage and slow tick rate versus PvE combatants by around 40%, bringing its freeze time from approximately 0.8 seconds to approximately half a second. That's kind of big, because there is a lot of instances where the enemies will just run out of Silence and Squall and not die, and not get frozen even, they'll just be slowed. So that's better. The travel speed by 10% could be nuts in PvP, we'll see. Interesting. The wording here is interesting, because we've done a small touch-up on the ability to roam the battlefield and how quickly it converts from a slow to a freeze in PvE combatants. I think that on PvE combatants is specifically for this last sentence. There's no separation in the sentence with a semicolon, so hard to tell. It could mean both, but I don't know how you would increase the travel time in PvE and not PvP. That doesn't make sense. Next time, we have the Titan. Okay, so Titan, we're buffing the melee, essentially. Increase damage versus PvE combatants by 10%. Pretty good. Increase the size of melee, a target, search cone by around 50%. So you're going to be hitting things way more often. Increase the maximum lunge tracking angular speed from 7 degrees per second to 21 degrees per second. Again, pretty massive. And Glacial Quake now automatically begins sprinting when the player throttles forward, which is nice. That's just a buff so that you can actually shatter the crystals you're running through. Alright, and Cryoclasm has been changed and I'm trying to figure out whether I like this or not. Remove the sprint time requirement, but Cryoclasm now goes on cooldown for 4 seconds after one extended slide. I think I like this. So Cryoclasm is, by the way, is the really long slide you get on Titan Stasis. And it used to be that there was no cooldown whatsoever, it just buffed your slide hugely. They then changed it so that you had to sprint a bit before you got the boost. I think I'd have to play with it a bit, but I feel like this is a good change. And then finally we have Diamond Lands. So for Diamond Lands, we're making a couple of quality of life changes to help make it easier to pick up on the battlefield, and have generally improved its ease of use by increasing the size of its thrown projectile detonation versus all targets and its slam attack versus PvE combatants. Increased thrown Diamond Lance detonation radius from 3.5 to 5 meters, that's great. It always felt a little bit too small in PvP, in both for my liking, but mainly PvE is where I noticed it. Increased Diamond Lance slam detonation radius from 6.75 meters to 8 meters versus PvE combatants, interesting. Diamond Lance now shatters stasis crystals on direct impact, that's great. It's always kind of annoying when it didn't. You like throw it and it just damage the crystal, it was kind of annoying. Reduced Diamond Lance pickup interaction time from 0.2 to 0.1 seconds matching Strand tangles, that's much better. God, I didn't realize how annoying that was until it was written out in front of me. The amount of times like I'm sprinting and I like run past a Diamond Lance and go to pick it up and just don't. And it just stays on the ground and I have to double back if I want it. Never happens with Strand tangles, happens with Diamond Lance all the time. And we also increased the Lance pickup interaction radius from 0.7 to 3 meters, so it's gonna, yeah, once again, it's the same thing, right? It's probably a combination of the both that I had problems with, because like the amount of time I was in the interaction radius plus the fact that it took double as long to pick it up, you had to like stop to pick them up, whereas now they'll be like Strand tangles, you can be running at full speed and pick them up on the way. That's much better. Okay, now, meat and potatoes, Well of Radiance and Ward of Dawn. I think I'm just gonna read all of this. Back in November, we briefly touched on Well of Radiance and Ward of Dawn and how we are evaluating their place in the sandbox. With the launch of the final shape, we're making some large changes to both of these supers to push them into their more distinct identities and to reduce the fire and forget nature of Well of Radiance. Interesting. Well of Radiance's core fantasy has always been the supercharged healing empowered Rift combo, offering a rally point for your fire team during moments of focus. In its current form, its healing and damage resistance offer effective invulnerability, which removes any other defensive option from consideration on top of providing a sizable boost to your fire team's offensive output. We've chosen to push Well of Radiance further towards the offensive capability by allowing its radiance to persist for a short duration after players leave the well. Interesting. We're also pulling back on its defensive output, both defensive resistance and healing rate, by a significant margin. Significant margin, huh? Interesting. Well of Radiance now grants Radiant for 8 seconds when players exit the Well of Radiance area. Interesting. Okay. Reduced player survivability while standing in the Well of Radiance aura. Reduced healing per second from 100 to 50 health points, so that's the same as, yeah, restoration times 2. Increased heal on cast from 40 to 300. Oh, I see. So you can panic it easier now. Okay. So it's just a guaranteed full heal immediately. Interesting. Reduces damage resistance versus non-boss combatants from 40 to 20%. Okay. Reduces damage resistance from boss from 40 to 10%. Damn. Damage resistance versus enemy players is unchanged. That is surprising? Not that surprising. It's not out of the realm of possibility to kill someone in a well if you're in PvP. Increase the maximum orbs of power from defeating targets while in your Well of Radiance aura from 4 to 5. Kinda not as big of a nerf as I thought. They said here you're practically invulnerable. That's not entirely true. There are some instances in GMs and stuff where you still need to put your well far enough away because just the boss does so much damage that can kill you through well. Like unstopped champions on GMs a lot of the time could kill you in well. Particularly the unstopped ogres. If you don't stop them, they will kill you in your well. They just do enough damage. But it's, in other words, yeah, it is true that you were pretty much unkillable. So they're halving the healing and halving the damage resistance, quartering the damage resistance versus bosses. It is interesting though, because it means that you get the damage you get the damage even being not in the well. I also wonder whether that's also going to fix the issue that Well has currently, where if you're on Golden Gun, you don't want to be in the well, because for some reason Golden Gun doesn't get buffed by Well of Radiance. It does get buffed by Radiant. Even though they're the same buff, they're a 25% damage buff, so I'm wondering whether Well of Radiance will now just give you Radiant when you're standing in it as well. Rather than a separate buff that does exactly the same thing. Because that was an annoying interaction. Essentially, if you're on a Golden Gun player, and even still now until they implement this, and maybe even after they implement this, if you're standing in a well, you get less damage than if you're outside a well with Radiant, which is really stupid. But you can't double stack it, right? So if you're in the well, it just gets rid of your Radiant buff. So this is interesting. I think I'm fine with this. Because it means you can dip in and out of the well to get a Radiant buff. Let's see how they change Bubble, because it might be possible that they've made it such that you want to use both again. Let's have a look. Ward of Dawn, on the other hand, is meant to be a highly defensive safe haven for you and your team. In practice, our combat encounters don't have a lot of opportunities for this type of gameplay to shine, so we're making a change to allow Ward of Dawn to provide defensive capability while fighting around the dome, not just in it. We're also reworking Armor of Light to make your current health state while you're in the dome of Ward of Dawn, more understandable. And we're pushing Ward of Dawn away from its current offensive capabilities unless you specifically build into it. Interesting. Ward of Dawn, Armor of Light. Removed Armor of Light Overshield. Ward of Dawn now immediately applies a full Void Overshield to the caster and allies and to the dome. So again, this will persist when you leave, because it's a Void Overshield rather than the specific one for Ward of Dawn. It also means you can't double stack an Void Overshield with the Ward of Dawn Overshield, which nerfs it in PvP, which is good. It's going to be easier to kill someone, right? Interesting. Armor of Light now instead grants additional damage resistance to players inside the Ward of Dawn, 30% versus enemy players and 60% versus combatants. Okay, so you're in the ward, you're essentially invulnerable. 60% damage, 60% DR plus all the other shit we get from all the other things we have for DR is nuts. Like 60%. 60% plus full overshield, you're fine. Effective health of players inside the Ward of Dawn dome, I need to just stop reading that all as one. Inside the bubble, remains roughly the same as it was before versus PvE combatants. Okay, the effective health inside Ward of Dawn is significantly lower than it was before versus players in PvP. It cannot be further increased by stacking Bastion barricades inside. Yeah, exactly, that's what I was saying before. You can't double stack your overshields. Allies near the Ward of Dawn dome have Void Overshield trickled over time, similar to the volume behind a Bastion barricade. Okay. Interesting. It no longer provides weapons of light by default. This behavior has been removed to the benefit of Helm of Saint 14. This makes sense because this here is also what Saint did, right? I'm pretty sure the Helm of Saint 14 just gave you an overshield, so that's now intrinsic. So now the damage buff comes when you have Helm. If this provides weapons of light to your whole team, if your bubble is cast with Helm of Saint 14, then this is very, very good. Potentially replacing well good. Although maybe not, because Radiant is still a better damage buff than Weapons of Light still, I think. It's 20% versus 25, I think. So, maybe not. The Ward of Dawn caster can now generate additional orbs of power by defeating enemies with melee attacks in or near their Ward of Dawn dome. Okay. So, I think it's going to probably end up going back to a meta of using both. I think you're going to put a well down and then you're going to put a bubble at the back of your well. So like the second half, the back half of your well is bubble. That way you can walk into it, which will give you a full overshield. You can walk back out, you'll keep that overshield. Yeah, so yeah, Ward of Dawn is an instant. I think you're going to be using both because you're going to be next to the Ward of Dawn. It's going to be continuously adding to your overshield, which combined with the healing is going to essentially give you old well. Not exactly the same, but pretty close, right? Because you're going to be building overshield at the same time as healing if you have both up. This is interesting. This might actually just push it back to having both. But like the opposite of what it used to be. It used to be you wanted the dome because the damage buff was bigger. So you'd run into the dome, get the damage buff, come out into your Well of Radiance for the survivability, and now it's the opposite, right? You have the Well of Radiance for your damage buff, because it's more, And then you have the Ward of Dawn for survivability because it's adding to your overshield, which is helping with the healing. Interesting. I think I really like this change. I think I like this change. Additionally, we've seen that supers above and burst damage supers in the same tier have increasingly dominated the Crucible landscape due to their uptime. While we don't want to maintain some texture across a map, while we do want to maintain some texture across a match when supers become available, the delta is currently a bit too high, especially in 3v3 game modes. That makes sense. To reduce this a bit, we're making a change to all supers with the final shape. While different types of supers will have different passive recharge times, all supers will now use the same damage-based recharges. Interesting. So it's no longer a scalar multiplier on everything. I see. This means that no matter what super you have equipped, dealing a specific amount of damage to a specific enemy type will result in the same amount of super energy gained, whereas previously the value could vary by about 30%. Yep. This effectively increases the real-world uptime of your roaming supers in the slowest recharge tier and reduces the uptime of fastest recharging supers, like burst supers. Alright, now let's dive into each subclass for more general balance changes. Alright, let's go with Arc. Hunter Arc. Arc Staff, Heavy Palm Strike attacks and Heavy Air Slams blind enemies. That's a cool buff. I don't know if it'll make a difference, really. I mean, most of the time when you're doing the Heavy Palm Strike or the Air Slam, you're killing things anyway, but it's interesting. Disorienting Blow, decrease base cooldown time from 100 seconds to 90 seconds. I don't know if that's going to be enough to make me go off Combination Blow, because Combination Blow is so much better than Disorienting Blow, it's kind of nuts. And then we have Temper Strike, added additional damage resistance versus PvE combatants when activated, and the damage resistance will linger for a short time after the attack. So that's really good. It means you can kind of jump up and pop it and not get shot out of the sky in GMs. That's pretty much the main reason here, is when you're doing endgame content, it was very hard to use it, because you need, generally speaking, when you're using Temper Strike, you have to jump up into the air and then throw it. And because you didn't have much damage resistance, you had a bit, but it wasn't the highest. It meant that you could just get shot out of the air, because everything just looks at you, shoots you, and you die immediately. It's good that this is only in PvE too, because in PvP, I feel like the damage resistance you get for Temper Strike is good. It's like sitting in a perfect spot, I feel. You can still kill it. If the whole team looks at a Temper Strike and shoots him, you can kill him before they get the super off. But if it's a 1v1, they just win 100% of the time, which is what you need. Alright, Warlock. Lightning Surge, added additional damage resistance versus PvE combatants when activated, lingering for a short duration after the attack. This is great. It means that Lightning Surge build where the dev was talking about it, where you can do it with Arcane Needle on Prismatic, is going to be really good. Because when he said that, I was like, that sounds really cool, but in high-end content, you can't use Lightning Surge because you end up next to enemies and they kill you. But if this damage resistance is high enough, this could be really good, because it means you can slide in Lightning Surge and get out, or maybe cast your Rift before you die. So that's going to be really good. Ball Lightning, increase the final arming shape size by 30%, and fix an issue where the arming shape was offset upwards, higher than the maximum damage of the projectile detonation. I had noticed this before. So Ball Lightning, if you fire it above an enemy, it's supposed to do a lightning strike down, but apparently the Z offset wasn't working correctly, so you would fire it and it would just do nothing and go over someone's head. So that's fixed, so that's just cool. Chain Lightning has been a staple of Stormcall's identity since its inception as an upgrade to the Thunderstrike melee of the original Destiny. While the introduction of Jolt in Season of Plunder and its propagation across the sandbox, however, it started to feel a bit left behind. We're increasing the damage dealt by its chains by 100% to help increase its effectiveness against crowds and enemies and make it feel like a worthy option compared to Warlock's many other ranged melees. Chain Lightning increased the secondary chain projectile base damage from 27 to 54. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes it viable in PvE. PvP, I feel like I'm always going to use Ball Lightning if I'm an Arc, but I feel like in PvE, that's now a toss-up. It's interesting. Alright, moving on to Titan. Thunderclap. Big changes to Thunderclap. Added additional damage resistance versus PvE combatants when activated, lingering for a short duration after the attack. That's huge, because Thunderclap you literally can't move. And it's increased the minimum damage versus PvE combatants by 20%, and the maximum damage by 33%, so that's kind of big. And by enemy players, the maximum damage increased by 14%. The reason that they're doing this specifically is so that you one-shot literally everything. They want it so that if you manage to get a fully charged up Thunderclap, it kills someone irrespective of what overshields or whatever they have. which is fair. That makes a lot of sense. It takes so long to charge up a full one. Getting a player kill with it is so hard that it needs to be a one-shot every time. I agree with this change. And the minimum damage being increased by 20% is kind of nuts too, because it's very quick if you just do it. If you just do like the tap, essentially, giving that bonus damage is kind of nuts. Particularly for trash, right? It lets you wipe out a big area of trash pretty easily. Alright, so I've just read all this. Whoops, did not mean to search that. I just read all this. I'm going to go over it again because it's interesting. It's been difficult to find a solid place for knockout aspect across game modes. In part, this is due to the harsh difference in the value of unstunning passive health regeneration in different game environments. Knockout's passive health regeneration is very quick at max recovery, but can be interrupted. Generally, in PvP encounters, players are dramatically less likely to take chip damage after resolution of an engagement, resulting in much more healthy recovery than we think is comfortable. By contrast, with the increased number of enemies in PvE encounters, Knockout's passive healing can feel ineffectual because there are many more sources of incoming damage at any given moment. To help address this, we're reworking the way Knockout's healing works altogether. Rather than unstunning passive regeneration, defeated enemies with melee attacks now grant a chunk of health in a very short window, 0.1 seconds. And that chunk of health increases based on the type of target you defeat. We're also increasing the bonus damage granted to powered melee attacks versus PvE combatants while Knockout is active. This is interesting. Generally speaking, Knockout I have only ever really used in PvP. The way they're changing this makes me think maybe I will use it in PvE as well. Increase the bonus damage granted by powered melee attacks versus PvE combatants from 25 to 50. That's very, very good. Reworked healing behavior. No longer unstun health regeneration on melee defeats, now instantly gives a chunk of healing that scales with the type of enemy defeated. Player, 30 points of health. Minor combatant, 50 points of health. Major combatant, 75 health points. And champion plus combatant is 100 points of health. Interesting. Alright, next up we have Touch of Thunder. It's kind of getting de-nerfed to from where it was. Increase the tracking travel speed when targeting PvE combatants by 0.5 and 1 meters per second, increasing with the storm's lifetime. So it's now going to be tracking PvE combatants like it did before they nerfed it. That's the interesting thing with Touch of Thunder, is that the Storm Nade was so powerful in PvP that they nerfed it across the board because it could just track so aggressively. It looks like they're essentially bringing that aggressive tracking, but specifically on PvE combatants. So that's going to be quite good, I think. It's actually worth using Storm Nade and Touch of Thunder now, potentially. And also they're changing Lightning Nade. It's now applying Jolt after the first damage event rather than prior. Alright, so Arc Grenades more generally, aside from just the Touch of Thunder aspect. Storm Nades increase damage to PvE combatants by 20%. So that's actually going to make them even better with Touch of Thunder. Actually, no, it's not. Okay. I should have read the next line. Touch of Thunder variance damage is unchanged. That makes sense. Because Touch of Thunder already does like double the damage or something. It's something nuts. It's a lot of damage on Storm Nades. So Script Grade, increased damage versus PvE combatants by 15%. Don't know if that's going to be enough to make Skip Nade good. We'll see. An Arc Bolt, increase versus PvE combatants by 15%. Again, remains to be seen. The interesting part is, after they nerfed Storm Nade, I just started using Pulse Nade on everything because it was just the best grenade. I'm hoping these damage buffs are going to be enough to bring them in line such that it's a choice. Because I actually quite like Skip Nades, but I never use them because they're just less damage than throwing a Pulse Nade to a group of enemies. So we'll see. 15% might be enough. It's a pretty sizable buff, but we'll see. Arc Fragments. Spark of Recharge. Ability regeneration bonus now persists until the player returns to full shield rather than deactivating as soon as shield begins to recharge. That's just a straight buff. Spark of Beacons now also triggers on defeating targets with arc power ammo weapons while amplified, so that's just buffing the application of it, so it's quite good. And Spark of Frequency now also grants 15 weapon stability on powered melee hits in addition to its reload benefit. So again, straight buffs across the board on all the fragments. I quite like it. Next we move on to Solar. So for Solar Hunter, lightweight knives are getting massively buffed. I don't know if this is enough to make me swap off Knife Trick on PvE or swap off Heavy Knife on PvP, but we'll see. So Lightwave Knife now has 2 melee charges by default, increasing throw animation speed by 33%. So I think the idea is you're going to be able to throw 2 knives very, very quickly. And reduced suppression time between throws, so both knives can be thrown very quickly back to back. The additional melee charge does not stack with Ophidia Spath due to the exotic unique energy recharge behavior. We'll be monitoring this and evaluating how things are playing once things go live. Interesting. So you can't get 3 knives, which is unfortunate. Because that's immediately what I thought when I saw this. I'm like, give me a Phidias Faith, I want to yeet 3 knives. But I guess they thought of that. They're also updating Knock 'em Down to apply to this. So when you have Knock 'em Down equipped, you also get a reduced internal cooldown on throwing knife refund from 1 second to 0.2 seconds, which is nuts. It's like a fifth of the time. And they are also nerfing full-on golden gun stacking on boss damage. So there is I don't know, you may not have seen it, but there is a method on bosses that people are doing at the moment. Specifically on Pantheon, people are doing it quite a bit, I think, where you just have a bunch of Solar Hunters on Golden Gun. You fire your Golden Gun with Star Readers on, and because Marksman's Golden Gun gives you extra orbs of power, you can just chain supers literally infinitely. The entire boss fight, you can just super, 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 and it's just a lot of damage. So the way they're nerfing this is actually interesting. It's probably the best way to nerf it, I think, is that they're not nerfing Star Readers at all. What they're doing is when you hit enemies with the Golden Gun Marksman, it doesn't give you the full strength of the Orb of Power. It's like giving you less. So when hitting a non-boss enemy, it reduces the strength from 0.75% of a normal super orb to 0.5. And when you're hitting a boss, 0.75 to 0.4. And hitting boss enemies while Star Reader sails are equipped, it reduces this even further from 0.75 to 0.35 on a normal super orb of power. For Titan, Consecration is getting buffed, which I like. They're also adding it's not necessarily a buff per se, but it's adding more interaction because of Prismatic. So Consecration Slam Attack can now shatter Stasis Crystals. That's great. I feel like it probably would anyway, just because of the amount of damage you do, but now it just does it intrinsically. Ignitions generated by Consecration now do 20% additional damage to PvE combatants. That's fantastic. Fix an issue where Consecration Slam Attack was sometimes unable to damage floating combatants while they're on the ground. And fix an issue where Consecration intended PvE damage resistance was not being applied. So that's cool. So they're making the survivability more consistent. Because apparently it was bugged, I think. And the Consecration Slam will now kill like servitors and stuff. Things that are like, they're on the ground, essentially. They're just hovering rather than walking, so sometimes it would just whiff, which was kind of annoying. Consecration is really good now, by the way. They buffed it in a previous update, and now it's getting even more buffs coming with Prismatic, so I think my build going into the final shape is going to be a Consecration build, essentially. Stasis melee, so you get 3 melee charges, then Consecration. It just seemed really fucking fun. We'll see. Hammer of Soul is also getting kind of buffed. Increase the projectile submunition count when Soul Invictus is not equipped as follows. If the projectile detonates within the first 0.7 seconds of its lifetime, it now creates 4 shrapnel submunitions, up from 3. If the projectile detonates after 0.7 seconds of a lifetime, it now creates 6 shrapnel, up from 5. When Soul Invictus is equipped, only 3 shrapnel submunitions are created, regardless of flight time. Kind of esoteric, but essentially, what you want to do with this super is throw it really far away, because it does more damage. That's always been the case, but they're making it now so that when you're in your Solar subclass, that's less relevant, but when you're in Prismatic, or not using Soul Invictus, I guess technically, but I feel like you're always going to be using Soul Invictus if you're in on Solar. But if you're not using Soul Invictus, that is the case, but if you are, it doesn't matter as much. You can just yeet them at your feet, essentially. And the submunitions now deal additional damage when Soul Invictus is not equipped, with the damage increasing after the first 0.7 seconds of the projectile's lifetime. Okay, so it's just being buffed. You're getting buffed damage when you don't have Soul Invictus, and the reason this is because Soul Invictus is very, very powerful because of sunspots. Essentially, you can give yourself a sunspot, which buffs your damage. Therefore, it's making it a bit better when you don't have to rely on the sunspots, which is good. I like that quite a lot. And then finally we have Swarm Nade. They're just buffing Swarm Nade in every possible way. Size is being increased, the linger duration is being increased, and the damage is being increased to PvE combatants. Great. Swarm Nades are cool, but they're kind of They were kind of alright in PvP, but only because they locked down an area more so than they got kills. That's kind of not great, right? If you're throwing your grenade, you probably want to secure a kill with it rather than just stop someone from running at you. But anyway, moving on to Void. Void Hunter. Alright, so Void Hunter, they're essentially just making Smoke Bomb do damage. Like actual damage. Which is good. It always felt a bit bad that your melee on Void was like, it makes you go invisible. Or it blinds the enemy. That was it's great and all, but I want my abilities to do damage. So the lingering duration of smoke after detonation has been increased, so it's going to be there for 5 seconds when you throw a snare bomb. And it also now applies a small dot when they're inside the smoke, which is increasing in strength the longer they stay in the smoke. And then we have Trapper's Ambush, which is the kind of the dive grenade, the dive melee smoke bomb onto the ground. Increase the lingering duration of the smoke from 4.5 seconds to 6 seconds, and now applies snare bomb damage over time to enemies caught in the smoke, and fix an issue where the Trapper's Ambush smoke effect could be obstructed by ground geometry. I've never noticed that, but that's interesting. And they're also updating Star Executioner so that it works with glaive melees, which is interesting. I kind of like this. Realistically, I pretty much want every single melee effect to work with glaive melees, and sword melees as well. But, you know, I'll get what I'm given. Moving on to Titan. We have big buffs to shield throw, increase the maximum bounce count from 4 to 5, increase the maximum lifetime from 3 seconds to 4 seconds, and now increases its tracking, shape, size, and strength after each bounce, increasing its ability to consistently find a new target. Slightly increases the gravity and decreased thrust speed with each bounce. Interesting. That sounds like a nerf, but I don't think it is. Because I do notice that when I throw my shield, it tends to shoot up into the air fairly frequently. So this allows you to... I feel like it'll probably keep it more even leveled, so you're more likely to get kills with it. And also increase the damage by 20%, which is great. Shield Throw is a really cool ability, but I feel like I never use it because it's just too inconsistent. Buffing this is going to be really cool. It's also presumably going to buff the Shield Throw in Super as well, so the roaming Void Super might actually be more useful too, because you're going to be able to get more Shield Throws hitting consistently. Offensive Bulwark is also getting buffed, so we can now only extend Void over shield timer to its normal maximum duration to prevent an issue where players get into a bad timer state, so let's just make it consistent. And now regenerates a small portion of your active Void shields with each melee defeat. That's great. And finally we have Warlock. Chaos Accelerant makes the Magnetic Grenade go into the big kind of, it's almost like a melee push. But they're increasing the maximum intensity of the knockback by a bit, and they're increasing damage by 20%. And it also now passively decreases your magnetic cooldown grenade by 10% while you have Chaos Accelerant equipped. So that's quite good. It's just buffing the magnetic grenade because not a lot of people were using it, which makes sense. And finally we have Pocket Singularity, which is just getting a massive damage buff. Let's be honest, it needed the massive damage buff. It was kind of shit. And they're also buffing Nova Bomb, which is... this one's interesting to me. So the Cataclysm variant, you're increasing the Seeker count from 4 to 6. That seems nuts. It seems even more nuts when they're fixing an issue where the Seekers could get blown up on environment, like as soon as they're created. That's the bigger issue, right? The big problem with the Seekers is the fact that they just disappear half the time. Like, they'll blow up on the Nova Bomb itself. You'll throw the Nova Bomb blows up, and the Seekers blow up in the explosion of the Nova Bomb, so they just don't exist. So fixing that issue is the main thing. Going up to 6 Seekers is even better. That seems like a really big buff. And then the Vortex variant, increase the Vortex linger duration from 7 to 10 seconds, and fix an issue where the linger visual effects are shutting off early. The problem that Vortex has right now is that even in optimal settings, it does less damage than Cataclysm. So if you have something stand in the Vortex the entire time, it does less damage. Like if you throw it on a boss, right? And the boss just stands still in the lingering effect, it still does less damage than Cataclysm hitting the big explosion and then hitting 3 of its Seekers. So I don't know whether the 3 extended seconds is actually going to make it better than Cataclysm. I feel like the damage has to be better on Vortex if something stands in it the entire time, which currently it's not. It's like pretty much always beneficial to go Cataclysm. Because PvP is better because it tracks, Vortex doesn't. And in PvE, it's better because it just does more damage. Cataclysm does more damage than Vortex, which is nuts. It feels like it should be the other way around. It feels like if you have something standing in the Vortex the entire duration of the Vortex, it should take more damage than Cataclysm hitting once. That's just my opinion, anyway. Strand updates. I assume we're going to get some nerfs on Titan. Okay, so first up, we have Threat of Warding. They're reducing the Woven Mail duration on Orb of Power pickup from 10 seconds to 5 seconds. This makes sense. It also kind of adds some more versatility to Titans, because it means that giving Woven Mail with like throwing your Threadling at people and stuff is actually going to be more beneficial than it is currently. The Threat of Warding was just so good because one Orb of Power giving you 10 seconds of Woven Mail kind of nuts. So that's probably a good change, I think. Alright, moving on to Hunter. Ensnaring Slam. Detonation volume versus enemy players is now a cylinder with a 6.5 meter radius rather than a sphere of an 8 meter radius. The results in fewer instances of victims correctly attempting to counterplay by jumping but being caught in the ensnaring slam detonation high up in the air. This, I wouldn't have understood this change except for me playing Trials last weekend. I played against Jez a couple of times. Jez was getting me with this consistently, and I hadn't seen it in PvP at all, but running in with a Drang and he was just suspending me and then shooting me with a Drang. So yeah, interesting. I wouldn't have thought this is a problem because no one ever used it in PvP against me, but then I got hit by it hard this weekend, so this makes a lot of sense. Because it was the thing too, like you would jump backwards away from them and you would feel like, oh, I'm out of this, and then you'd still just get suspended. This makes sense though, so it was a sphere rather than a cylinder in the actual hitbox. That makes sense. Also, Threaded Spike is getting a damage reduction from 79 to 70 damage. That's probably fine, I think. Specifically against players. And catching your Threaded Spike no longer breaks invisibility. This is very, very good, specifically coming up with Prismatic because of Stylish Executioner. Alright, next up we have Warlock. Alright, the buff here is nuts, right? They're buffing Weaver's Call massively. So defeating a target with Strand damage now has a chance to generate a perched Threadling with a higher chance of generation from defeating more powerful targets. This damage can be from any source, including other Threadlings. We're gonna have big Threadling spam. Like, I feel like I'm gonna actually make a proper Threadling build rather than just the meme one I have running and actually just be spamming Threadlings. That's just cool. Goes into the kind of, I don't even know if it necessarily will be good, but it's cool because it's gonna go into the fantasy of those, like, just create, go my children, go! I like it. Grapple Tangles and Melee. Here we're getting big nerfs, arguably too big nerfs in my mind. So the general gist of it is they're making it so that specifically Titans really can't do the thing where they make a grapple melee point and then they just grapple to that and melee over and over and over and over again. So, Grapple Tangles. No longer fully refresh their duration when grappled to, now increase their duration by a maximum of 5 seconds per grapple, reducing to a maximum of 1 second after 5 consecutive grapples to the same grapple tangle. This I'm okay with. This I think is bad. I also don't like this either, but we'll go over this in a second. So I think the big utility for movement, which was the original reason they did it, right, was that you could create something so you could grapple to it, jump out, grapple again. Hunters could always do that because a lot of the time they're going to be using 2 grapples anyway, right? I don't like this. Well, see, maybe the wording on this is just wrong, but it looks to me like if you're trying to use it for a traversal, you now can't. Because you're just getting, like, what is the point? I don't get it. This here is a perfect nerf to the Titan spam, right? So you grapple to it, the next grapple, it doesn't immediately refund your grapple, so that's fine. So you can't just spam on the same thing over and over and over again, but I feel like it has to give you a full recharge when you grapple to it. Otherwise you can't use it for movement and traversal at all. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the wording here. No longer fully refresh their duration when grappled to. That just seems bad, because I can't use it for a traversal properly. Because the only reason you use it is because you get another grapple afterwards. I don't know, man. Alright. And this part here I dislike as well. I'll go into this, I'll just read it and then I'll go into it afterward. Additionally, grapple melee will no longer be able to be used after firing your weapon. This is primarily intended to reduce the number of difficult to understand grapple melee deaths in the Crucible, where players can grapple towards you, fire a single hand cannon shot, and then follow up with a grapple melee at a very fast cleanup. But it also reduces the number of melee damage stacking sources, which can spiral out of control very quickly. They are easily achievable with grapple melees by removing 1-2 punch from the equation. I liked this functionality because it was a skill gap. If I got killed by someone, like if I have Wala shooting towards me at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and he manages to pull out his shotgun me, then grapple melee me and I die, fine, I'm cool with that. I feel like that should be a thing. Because it's not trivial to do. You have to actually have a vague amount of skill to be able to do it, because you need to cancel the grapple, you need to pull out your gun, you need to fire and hit, and then you need to do the grapple melee. It was like, there was mechanical things you had to do it. It was an actual skill gap. And also the 1-2 punch, this was only really an issue because you could spam the grapple melee, right? Like, does it matter if I get a 1-2 punch grapple melee buff? Who gives a shit? I feel like this wasn't really used as much anyway, because I think you're still going to be able to get the 1-2 punch effect, right? It also depends what this means as well. My assumption is this is going to be like, after you grapple, if you shoot your gun, you can't do the grapple melee. That's how I'm assuming it's going to work, but I guess it also could just be a timer, in which case it could be shit. But like, you can still 1-2 punch shotgun, grapple vertically, and then do the grapple melee, right? I'm pretty sure you can still do that. So it's not really removing it from the equation at all. It's just making it so that you don't do it. You don't grapple towards the boss, pull out your shotgun, shoot the shot as you're going towards him, and then do the grapple melee. Which, I mean, I wasn't doing that often anyway, to be honest. I dislike this change. I feel like this is completely unnecessary when you've fixed this. I also don't like this at all, because this does the same thing. I don't know, man. We'll see. Now we get on to Titan. This could be bad. Let's have a look, eh? Alright, so first things first, we have Into the Fray. They are nerfing the ability uptime on it, which I think is fine. It's keeping the survivability, it's just reducing the melee regen scaler from 4 times to 3 times, which is significant, but I think fine. Like, I think I'm okay with that nerf, to be honest. And next up, we have Banner of War. Reduce the maximum timer from 30 to 24 seconds. I think this is okay. I think that's okay. Because I think essentially the way that they're doing it is such that they want you to continuously be killing stuff, which I get, right? They don't want you to be able to hide for a full 30 seconds before running out to keep your timer up. So I think I'm okay with that change. The next two I'm less okay with. Melee, Glaive Melee, and Super Bonus now have diminishing returns with Syntheseps as follows. Melee bonus damage decreases from 1.4 to 1.15. Glaive Melee bonus decreases from 1.25 to 1.125. And Super Bonus decreases from 1.4 to 1.2. I don't know if I like this. Maybe it's okay? I don't know. This remains to be seen. This might just make it so that it's not like a one-shot on Ultras without 1-2 punch. It may make 1-2 punch more required for the build? I don't know. Without damage testing, it's hard for me to tell, but it seems like a massive nerf. Glaive, I care less about. I was never using Glaive with Syntho Banner of War. I mean, I guess it's a natural progression to do that, but I wasn't using Worm God. I was tending to just go Syntho most of the time. But this is a massive nerf. Also, kind of makes sense. Melee bonus decrease from 1.4 to 1.1 based on stack count, and Glaive melee bonus reduced from 1.4 to 1.05 based on stack count. That's still a massive nerf. Like, Worm Gods was nuts, don't get me wrong, but they're now making a full stack Worm God worse than 2 stacks currently. I do kind of like the fact that they're nerfing the damage on Banner of War more so than the survivability. That's cool, I guess. Because, like, the good thing about Banner of War is the fact that you can stand in, like, you can go in and kill shit, right? It remains to be seen whether or not these nerfs are big enough. Like, is this a big enough nerf that I swap off Synthos to something else? Maybe. I don't know. It remains to be seen. I have to do testing. I don't like it off the bat, because I do love my Banner of War build, but it is kind of brain dead. I don't know, we'll think about it. It also may not even matter as much, because let's be honest, I'm probably going to be using Prismatic for an entire year anyway. So, I've had my year of Banner of War. I think I'll swap to a year of Prismatic after this anyway. Finally, Frenzied Blade, we've identified an issue where the melee lunge target point was being offset too far forward from the actual lunge target, resulting in some odd behavior when using Frenzied Blade at very close quarters. Reduce the forward offset for melee lunge target point from 0.4 meters to 0.18 meters. Okay. So hopefully that should fix the thing where you overshoot your melee by a fuck ton, which happens all the time on Frenzied Blade. The amount of times I whiff a melee on Frenzied Blade is nuts, particularly if I'm at even the slightest elevation. If I'm floating in the air a tiny bit, your melee, you just go straight over someone's head. Alright, conclusion. Whew, that's everything we have for now. We're extremely excited to see how the next era of Destiny 2 Sandbox unfolds after the launch of the final shape, and we'll be closely monitoring the impact of these changes. As always, keep the feedback coming, and we'll see you next time. Okay, well, feedback coming. Most of these I think I'm okay with, and some of them I don't know until I see it. This Worm God one seems absolutely nuts. I think that's the thing about this one too, right? I guess not. I guess I was gonna say it makes Worm God completely useless compared to Syntheseps, but not really. Because 2 stacks of Worm Gods is still better than, like, Synthos now. It might actually swap it. It might make Synthos fucking useless and Worm God's the way to go. Because I can beat Synthos with 2 stacks of Worm Gods. That's interesting. They also don't nerf Super Bonus with Worm God. Does that not work currently? As I said, I don't use Worm God at all currently. I've been Synthoceps since the start. Someone let me know in the comments if you know whether or not the super gets buffed by Worm God. Because presumably, because they haven't nerfed it, I assume it just doesn't get the buff anyway. Which is where Synthos would eke out, I guess, the 20% super damage buff. I don't know. This remains to be seen. But the only one I think that really annoys me is this one here. I don't like this change. I don't like this change. This change is fine. Stopping the Titan grapple melee thing, I'm okay with. This gets rid of all utility to ever use a grapple tangle. And this here, I feel like was just a good skill option that doesn't exist anymore. They're the only things I really care about. The rest of this I think I'm okay with, including the well and the bubble nerf. I think I like the well and the bubble nerf, actually. Because it makes them... apart from anything else, it makes Ward of Dawn now... Like, I want to use this in PvE now. Whereas, as soon as they nerf the damage to be less than Well of Radiance... Fuck Bubble. Haven't used it since they got that nerf in. I'm also not entirely sure whether this is going to be enough to nerf Bubble in PvP. Well, maybe. Making it more easy to kill someone in a well, that might be enough to nerf it in PvP. But this is mainly a PvE nerf anyway. I don't think they care too much about PvP well. It's not as oppressive as Bubble. It's an interesting position, because I feel like this has made it... This is a PvE buff, a PvP nerf. This is a PvE nerf, and a little bit of a PvP nerf, but I don't know if it's enough to make a difference. It may just be neutral. But I do like the changes they've done here. I actually quite like them. It means that using both is going to be useful again. But yeah, that's it. I'll have edited this down so that, like, I haven't read the whole thing. If you want to listen to the whole thing or read the whole thing, I will have the article linked in the description, as well as I'll link... I'm sure Astacross has done a thing where he's gone through and read the entire thing verbatim. So I'll link that as well. But with that, if you like the video, please leave a like. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.